Almost 1,400 years ago, the ancient and prosperous lands of the Middle East were on the verge of a conflict between three empires and three religions. The Roman state was at war with the Iranian empires since the 60s BC, and then the Roman Empire's western portion was lost to foreign invasions. In the 3rd century AD, the Ghassanids and Lakhmids were introduced to the Roman-Sassanid wars as a factor and participated as scouts, raiders, and light cavalry units within the armies. Their populations worshipped traditional Arab paganism and Monophysite Christianity, which created tensions with their suzerains. The religious tensions between the Lakhmids and the Sassanids were compounded by the attempts of Shah Khosrow II to control the region directly. This forced the Lakhmid tribes to ask their Arab brethren to the south for help. The Sassanids used the internal strife within the Eastern Roman Empire as a pretense to declare war on the empire, and scored a number of impressive victories in the first years of the war. The Roman Empire was on the brink of destruction, but it survived. Heraclius defeated the Sassanids at Nineveh in 627, and threatened the capital Ctesiphon in 628, but the conflict achieved nothing. The Arabian Peninsula was going through an upheaval when Muhammad was born, and soon started spreading the message of a new religion, Islam, in his home city of Mecca. The Meccans didn't receive it well, and started to persecute adherents of Islam, which prompted Muhammad and his followers to emigrate to Medina. According to the early Muslim sources, Muhammad sent envoys to the neighboring states urging their leaders to join Islam and bow to the one God Allah. The Sassanid Shah Kavad insulted the Muslim envoy, while the envoy sent to the Romans was killed in Ghassanid territory. The Sassanid Shah Kavad II killed his brothers to secure the throne, which resulted in disagreements between the Persian and Parthian nobles. The Persian party allied with Khosrow's general Sharbaraz, who killed Ardashir III and Mahadharjushnaz, and became the Shah. Farrukh offered a marriage between Shapur and Azarmidokh to stop the war, but she refused and the noble usurped the throne. Farrukh's son Rostam marched his troops to Ctesiphon to avenge his father, but Firuzan killed Baran and Rostam left the capital for the frontier. The armies of both Firuzan and Rostam reached an accord, and Yazdijerd III was crowned. The Sassanid realm was extremely vulnerable, as the Parthian clique controlled the northeastern portion of the empire and Turkic raiders attacked from the Caucasus and Central Asia. The first Caliph Abu Bakr sent a portion of his army to raid the Ghassanids, but was defeated by the rebels in early August. Abu Bakr proved to be a talented commander and divided his army into smaller groups, which attacked the rebel groups around the peninsula. This strategy worked to perfection and the caliph's rule over the entire region was restored. The leader of the Arab Bani Bakr tribe, Mutana bin Haritha, was raiding the Sassanid territories in southern Iraq and informed Abu Bakr of this fact in early 633. Khalid ibn al-Walid was ordered to invade the region, but threatened Hufir instead, and had to march towards Hufir via Uballa. Khalid was hoping to tire the Sassanid army by attacking multiple cities and fortresses, and this would become one of the most important elements of the early Muslim expansion. In the first days of April, the tired Sassanid forces approached, and the battle that would occur in the area is traditionally known as the Battle of the Chains. However, the description of the Sassanid forces in the Muslim sources makes no sense tactically. Khalid's army was arranged in a similar manner to the Sassanids, but stayed behind the hills dividing the two armies. After some hours, Khalid emerged on the hills and his troops stopped some distance away from those of Hormuzd. The battle started with a duel between Hormuzd and Khalid, but a few Sassanid skilled warriors attacked Khalid and killed Hormuzd. Kaka bin Amr and Khalid were able to defeat the Sassanid fighters and return to their lines. The armies engaged each other, and the Muslim infantry charged the Sassanid footmen a few times, clashing and falling back without dealing much damage. However, the Muslim troops were much more rested, and Khalid's center managed to crack the disciplined Sassanid line in a few places. Shah Yazdijerd sent an army under Karins to reinforce his governor, but he was stopped by the rest of Hormuzd's army, led by Qubaz and Anushjan, and a mobile force commanded by Mutana, probably sent by Khalid to chase the remainder of the Sassanid force and scout ahead. Karins didn't move to the strategically crucial Uballa to protect it, likely worried that Mutana would be able to attack his flank and rear. Khalid was informed by Mutana that a new army was moving to the south. The Battle of the River took place in the third week of April, and Khalid was able to reinforce his army by recruiting from the local Arab tribes. Khalid personally scouted the positions of Karin's forces, and was sure that winning a set-piece battle was his only option to continue the campaign. The armies formed up, with infantry in the center and cavalry on the wings. The battle started with Karin's calling for a duel, but Khalid stayed back and one of the duelists galloped towards the Sassanid commander, and the Sassanid commanders were soon killed. Khalid ordered his entire army forward, but the Muslim troops were able to capture the Sassanids with ease. The sources do not give a clear picture of what happened here, but the Sassanid army lost anywhere from 15 to 30,000 troops. After the victory at the Battle of the River, Khalid didn't cross into central Iraq, probably because he needed to create a new administration in the region and start collecting taxes. He also liked to fight on the edges of the deserts. The First Army, commanded by Andarzaghar, arrived in the region controlled by Khalid, and took positions outside of Walaja sometime in May. The Second Army was led by Bahman and was supposed to reinforce Andarzaghar if the Muslims indeed decided to move to Al-Hira. Khalid decided to march west and defeat Andarzaghar without alerting Bahman, and reinforced his army from the Arab tribes. According to the sources, Andarzaghar had room to maneuver and wait for Bahman along the river, but he was confident in his troops and kept his position. The two armies formed up in standard formation the next day. The Sassanid leader was surprised to see that the Muslim army was smaller than previously reported, and that it only consisted of footmen. Despite that, he was convinced that his position was impenetrable, and decided to wait. The Muslim commander ordered his entire army forward, but the Sassanids had the numbers, so their tired front line was replaced by the rear rank, which gave them edge. Khalid's personal martial skill saved the day when his cavalry appeared on the eastern ridge behind the Sassanid army. Khalid's troops were tired after the long march and the battle, and the Sassanid survivors found shelter in nearby allies. The Shah and Ctesiphon sent messengers to Bahman to go towards allies, and Khalid moved his troops towards the city and fought the allied Christian Arab and Sassanid army near allies. Khalid's force killed 70,000 enemies, mostly through the executions after the battle, but the Persian writers think that the army facing Khalid's 18,000 was comparable in size and managed to retreat towards Al-Hira after a minor defeat. The Arab commanders spent the next few months building up a new administration in the region and collecting taxes, while raiding parties brought loot and information on enemy movement. In late June of 633, Khalid left half of his troops in Al-Hira and marched west towards Anbar. Khalid's decision to attack Anbar surprised his opponents, and the leader of the garrison was forced to surrender. The Caliphate's raiding parties approached Ain al-Tamr from the direction of Al-Hira, and Khalid was able to win with relative ease. The next few months are shrouded in mystery, as Khalid was staying in Anbar and Ain al-Tamr, slowly setting up the administration of the newly acquired region, and helping Iyad ibn Ghanm defeat the rebels in the region. This gave the Sassanids some time to recruit and concentrate 5 armies. Khalid returned to Al-Hira with the troops he picked up around Damat al-Jandal, and ordered the Kaka bin Amr and Abu Layla to lead portions of the garrison to Huzaid and Kanafis respectively and take command, while his troops rested in the city. Khalid's corps attacked the sleeping Sassanid army of comparable size, and scored an easy victory, killing more than 10,000 Sassanid warriors. After that, he defeated a smaller Christian Arab force, but repeated his 3-pronged maneuver to avoid the losses. Khalid's mobility and the inability of his opponents to consolidate their forces meant that the region between Muzayya and Al-Hira was now under the control of the Caliphate. Khalid and his 20,000 men attacked the city of Firas on the border of the Sassanid and Eastern Roman empires, but the Romans and Sassanid garrisons united their strength on the north side of the Euphrates, while Khalid held the crossing on the other side. Khalid slightly retreated from his positions, perhaps baiting his counterpart into attacking. The Roman Sassanid army charged the Muslims, pushing their lines back, and the Muslims retreated even further, until Khalid's detached force took the bridge and attacked the allies from the rear. Khalid's main force started their counterattack, and most of the allied army was killed. Khalid was about to attack deeper into Persian territory when he received a letter from the Caliph, Abu Bakr, ordering him to move into Syria to battle the Romans. Khalid and a small contingent of his army prepared to move west. Khalid ordered 20 camels to drink large amounts of water so they could be used as makeshift storage tanks, and then slaughtered along the journey when nourishment was needed. After 5 grueling days of marching through this desolate landscape, Khalid's Muslim army emerged at Suwa and inflicted a minor defeat on the Roman Arab clients, the Ghassanids, at Marj al-Rahat. The Muslims had little time to celebrate their victory because the Roman emperor sent an army south to fight the Muslims. Very few hard facts are known about the Battle of Ajnadayn, but Muslim accounts vastly exaggerate the number of Roman troops they faced. Both armies formed up in extended lines, with 3 divisions of infantry and a cavalry flank guard on each wing. The fighting at Ajnadayn began when the Byzantine auxiliary missile units began to rain arrows and stones on their adversaries. However, one heavily armored Muslim warrior named Dairar marched directly into the arrow fire, shouting his war cry. The Byzantine commander Wardan attempted to lure Khalid into a trap, but was instead killed by the fearsome Dairar. The Arabs attacked again, this time with their flanks in front and center behind, and drove deep wedges through the Roman formations in this area. After his defeat, Heraclius sent his brother Theodore back to Constantinople in disgrace and retreated with his headquarters to Antioch, due to the threat of Muslim forces advancing on the city. After their victory at Ajnadayn, the Arab forces began to march north in the direction of Damascus, but were delayed by a blocking force of Byzantine troops on the northern shore of the Yarmouk River. The Muslim commanders stationed 20,000 soldiers outside the city's various gates to blockade the crucial thoroughfares when the Arabs neared the city. Damascus immediately began starving due to a lack of supplies and unpreparedness for a siege, while the Muslims were well supplied due to their domination of the fertile and productive local countryside. The Roman emperor sent a 12,000-strong relief force with plentiful supplies to help Damascus on September 9, but the Muslim scouts managed to send notice to al-Walid and he took the remaining cavalry at night to the Eagle Pass, where he managed to rout the Romans. The emperor's son-in-law decided to launch a counteroffensive, drawing men together from all sectors of the city towards the Gate of Thomas, where he was faced by around 5,000 soldiers under Shurabil. The Arabs responded accordingly, and Thomas himself led the assault. The defenders devised another plan to break the siege, but the Byzantines managed to break the Arab infantry and drive them back, but Khalid himself arrived with 400 elite mobile guard cavalry and struck the Roman flank, weakened the sortie irreversibly, and the defenders were slowly driven back inside the gates. The Byzantine forces led by the one-eyed Thomas himself fought fiercely at the Gate of Thomas, but were unable to break the Muslim siege. They withdrew slowly, and Thomas could no longer afford any more attempts at a breakout. On the night of the 18th of September, a 100-strong contingent led by the Muslim general himself climbed the walls, dropped into the city and killed the guards at the eastern gate. They then flung open the gate and let the remainder of Muslim forces at the eastern gate inside the city. Thomas sent envoys to Abu Ubaidah at the western Jabiya gate to offer surrender, but Khalid was furious that a surrender had been allowed even though the city had technically been taken by storm. The fall of Damascus was a shock for the Byzantines, as they probably thought the Muslim attack was a raid. The new caliph started implementing administrational and military reforms, and immediately relieved Khalid of his post and appointed Abu Ubaidah in his place. Khalid and 5,000 cavalry, guided by Jonah, started pursuing the Romans. Thomas and 10,000 people were heading towards Antioch when the Arab cavalry caught up to them. The Romans immediately noticed the Arab cavalry, but a second group of Khalid's horsemen appeared to the east and the Romans were forced to retreat. Khalid attacked the Romans from the west, and Thomas managed to get a few units to this front, but they were swept aside almost immediately. The Roman resistance continued for some time, but was broken within an hour. The Arabs headed to Damascus in early October and informed Khalid of his demotion. Khalid accepted it without much protest. Abu Ubaidah was slower and more deliberate than Khalid, and Umar preferred a more hands-on approach to the armies, which slowed down the campaigns due to the distance to Medina. The Muslims received some reinforcements, but Mutanna implemented the tactic of raids to keep the superior Sassanid forces at bay. Mutanna's raids were too dangerous, so he took command over the forces in Iraq and marched south, supported by the Sassanid generals Bahman, Jaban and Narsi, and the Armenian noble Jalinus. The Caliphate's force was now stronger than that commanded by Jaban, who suffered a minor defeat at Namaruk. Abu Ubaid decided to fight the approaching Sassanid armies in detail, and marched north towards Kaskar, hoping to knock out the smaller army under Narsi and knock him out. In late October of 634, the Sassanid and Muslim armies met near Kufa, and after some insults, the Sassanid emissary approached Abu Ubaid with Bahman's message: either you cross over to our side, and we shall let you, or we shall cross over to your side, and you must let us. The Arab cavalry galloped forward, but their horses were scared of the elephants, so Bahman moved his archers to the front and commanded them to shoot at the retreating Arabs. The Arab armies started fleeing in chaos, and the Sassanids started chasing them. Bahman didn't pursue Mutanna, who withdrew to Alais, and returned to Ctesiphon. Some sources claim that there was another rebellion against Rostam, others that Bahman was sent to deal with the Turkic raiders. The Muslim army was getting used to the new command structure, and the Romans were bringing more forces to the region. Theodore Tritherius' army gathered to the west of Pella, and Abu Ubaidah marched south towards Pella, leaving a corps under Yazid behind. The Arab army commanders decided to move towards Baisan to engage Theodore, but the vanguard led by Khalid got stuck in the mud and the Muslims were forced to withdraw back to Pella. Theodore marched his troops towards the river, but the Muslims were informed of his arrival and formed up for battle. Heraclius married his granddaughter to the young Sassanid Shah and spent time recruiting for a counterattack, while Abu Ubaidah and Khalid marched north and conquered the region to the south of Beirut. The Persians attacked the Muslim positions from the east, but Abu Ubaidah's 15,000 moved north and put Emesa in danger. Heraclius rushed reinforcements, but the garrison commanded by Harbiz wasn't strong at the art of siegecraft, and the lack of siege weapons made the assault impossible. The Arab army was planning to starve the Emesans, so Harbiz decided to sally out and kill as many foes as possible. The Romans were jubilant and not at all surprised when the Muslim army gathered to the south and started withdrawing. Emperor Heraclius has been preparing an army to counterattack for some time, but chroniclers wrote about the war 1 or 2 generations after the events. Heraclius was able to raise an army of 70,000 men for his attack on the Sassanid Empire, but his numbers were below 100,000 considering the logistical situation. Heraclius, who was now in his 60s, suffered from edema, so the army was divided into 5 columns, commanded by 5 generals. One column was sent to take Damascus, but the Arabs learned about the counterattack and ordered their corps to fall back. The Byzantines chased the Arabs after taking Emesa, and eventually made contact with their rear guard to the north of Jabiyah. The Arab commanders started repositioning their troops, and the Byzantines were able to retreat without engaging them. The Roman army built a fortified camp in the western part of the plain of Yarmouk, and the Muslims started preparing for battle by scouting the enemy positions. The negotiations ended in failure and the battle was inevitable. The battlefield was enclosed on its western and southern sides by deep ravines, and on the north and east it was mostly flat, save for a small hill called Samian. The Roman army moved forward and started forming up to the east and north of Allan on the 14th of August. The Muslim force matched the widths of the Roman army, but its formation wasn't as deep, and Khalid moved some of his light cavalry to the vanguard to observe the Romans. The Battle of Yarmouk started on August 15, 636, with the Roman light cavalry vanguard moving behind the main army, mostly reinforcing the left flank cavalry. The Arab vanguard did the same and joined the main cavalry units. The Romans moved a few light cavalry units forward, but were caught by their Arab counterparts and forced back. The Roman army attacked the Muslims as early as possible, but the light cavalry patrols who fought them during the night were ordered to remain in front, and so the Muslims managed to prepare for the attack. The Roman plan was to tie up the Muslim army's center and pressure its wings. The Byzantine left attacked the Muslim right on, but the Arab right-wing cavalry counterattacked and forced the Romans back. The Arab right flank reformed and started marching towards the approaching enemy, while the Roman right flank was even more successful, driving the Muslim left flank back. The Muslim cavalry attempted to stem the enemy advance with a counterattack, but it failed, and the horsemen joined their infantry en route to the camp. The Byzantines did not exploit the gaps in the Muslim formations by pouring troops between the gaps or by outflanking the enemy right by widening the front. Khalid took command of the cavalry in the center, attacked the enemy left and right flanks, and the Romans suffered fewer casualties but still retreated. The cavalry unit sent to attack the Roman center right surprised them and killed the commander. The Romans recovered from their surprise and pushed back the attackers, but the center also broke off and returned to their starting positions. The Roman right lost most of its troops, and that would prove important the next day. The Romans attacked the Muslim right and center right, but the Arabs in the second line reformed and returned to the battle, stabilizing the line. Khalid moved the reserve cavalry to the right and charged the Roman flank, but the Romans lacked the deepness. The Romans were getting frustrated, but they still outnumbered the foe. Khalid was worried about the losses among the Yemeni archers and on the right flank. The Romans attacked the right half of the Caliphate's army and pushed back the right flank, opening up space between the corpses for the Christian Arab light cavalry to charge into. The Muslims were suffering heavy casualties and Khalid needed to move to the area to stop the Romans from winning. The arrival of the reinforcements invigorated the beleaguered Muslims and they counterattacked, but the Romans had the upper hand and soon they were pushing back the Arabs. The arrows did so much damage to the Arabs that later Arab sources called it the Day of Lost Eyes. The Romans attacked the Muslim forces on the back foot and in full flight, but the leftmost unit of the center managed to crush the enemy detachment in front of it and attacked the right side of the Roman center. Eventually, the Muslim withdrawal stopped around the camps. At dawn of August 20th, the sixth day of the battle, both sides charged and engaged in the melee across the line. Khalid sent portion of his cavalry forward with an order to attack the side of the Roman left, but Roman cavalry wheeled around their footmen and blocked the advance. The Armenians were defending from two sides, but the Muslim horsemen charged into the rear of the Armenian formation and collapsed under the charge, while the Roman infantry fled on their own, towards the only crossing over the river. After the decisive victory at the Battle of the Bridge, Persian forces made no moves to capitalize on it, giving Caliph Umar time to come up with a response. The Caliph raised another army from the previously untapped tribes who rebelled against the Caliphate during the Ridda Wars. The Sassanid army, led by the best general, departed the capital at the head of a massive imperial force, balloting straight for the Muslims encamped near Qadisiyah. After an exhausting march, Rostam ordered his men to take up positions and encamp across from Saad's army. The two armies remained on their own side of the waterway for several months, with only small scouting missions and raids. The Muslims were fighting a two-front war, and kept the Mesopotamian army passive for the time being. However, the Sassanid commander refused to convert to Islam, and the Muslims challenged him to battle, arraying their forces in formation and withdrawing a mile to the rear. The army under the authority of Rostam Farrukhzad was likely made up of 60,000 Sassanid troops, and was multi-ethnic, having come together from regions all across the vast expanse of the territory ruled by the House of Sazan. The imperial army was composed of 30,000 warriors, 10,000 of whom were Persian immortals. They chained themselves together to signal the enemy that they were prepared to die. The Sassanid left and right wings were led by illustrious generals drawn from high-born Persian clans, and a screen of 33 mail-clad elephants was deployed in front of Rostam's line. Saad's 30,000 warriors were divided into 4 tribally organized divisions, and included Muslim forces from Arabia proper and Christian Arabs from the border of Sassanid territory. Although Saad ibn Abi Waqqas could have mounted a horse and exercised effective tactical control, ailments and injury prevented him from doing so. Instead, he appointed a trusted deputy to carry out his immediate orders. Rostam's plan was simple and to the point: smash both flanks of the enemy army and then smash into their exposed center. The Sassanid archers shot a barrage of arrows at the Muslim archers, but their low-powered bows and inferior arrows bounced harmlessly off the Persian heavy armor. Saad ordered his 7-strong elephant corps to charge the Muslims, but the Rashidun mounts forced their riders to scatter, leaving the infantry exposed. The Muslim warriors fell back slowly, suffering casualties but not breaking under the assault. Sa'd ordered light troops from the Arabian Bani Tamim tribe to deal with the Sassanids' assault beasts, and the agile warriors killed a vast number of the isolated elephant riders where they stood, while the rest led their exhausted war mounts back behind the main Persian line. In an attempt to take advantage of his enemy's lack of elephants, Sa'd ordered a general attack all across the front, but the Muslims were superior fighters and were able to punch through the Persian line. The last of the day's fighting had come to an end by nightfall, and the battered Rashidun warriors rested. The next morning, both armies lined up for battle, and after 2 hours of fruitless fighting, both sides pulled back. The Muslims were trading well with the Persians, but Rostam trusted in his superior numbers and used the break-in fighting to disguise the camels that the Rashidun army brought, spooking the horses into breaking ranks and almost causing the entire Sassanid army to buckle with the shock. When daylight came on the third day, the elephants charged at the Muslims, but the infantry was pushed back and hundreds of men were killed. Rostam sent a cavalry division on a deep flanking attack, but this was rapidly countered by a unit of Muslim riders. Although the attempt to destroy the elephants failed, the army of Islam was visibly about to disintegrate. Rashidun light infantry slid through the ranks and blinded the lead elephants, before swarming the creatures and their onboard missile troops. Sa'd ordered yet another full-scale assault, impacting on the Sassanids with devastating force, but the war was devolving into a war of attrition. Kaka decided to make a decisive move, attacking the blinded Persian center, breaking through the line and approaching Rostam. Although the Muslims had defeated the imperial army of the Sassanid Empire, the war in the region was hardly over.